Okay, let's dive right into Paul Castellano. He was a major figure, right? Head of the Gambino crime family in New York for almost a decade.
Absolutely. From 76 to 85, we're talking the most powerful of the five families. The capo di tutti capi, boss of bosses, some would say.
But his story ends dramatically. Gunned down,
Yeah.
middle of the day, outside a Manhattan steakhouse.
Yeah, during rush hour, no less. It was incredibly bold, probably the most audacious gangland hit in, well, modern mob history.
And it wasn't random. There was a power play involved.
Bro, definitely. John Gotti wanted the top spot. That's the crux of it.
But it's more than just ambition, isn't it? There were these underlying clashes, different personalities, different ideas about where the family should go.
Exactly. That's where it gets really fascinating. The tension between Castellano and Gotti ran deep. It was about the whole direction of the Gambino family.
Right, so what was the core disagreement there? About the business itself?
Fundamentally, yeah. Gotti was, old school in a way. He was about the traditional rackets, like airport heists, stuff that brought in quick cash.
Street stuff.
Street stuff, exactly. Castellano, though, he had this vision, maybe pushing towards legitimate businesses. He saw that as maybe safer, more sustainable,
Interesting. Trying to clean things up, maybe?
or at least appear to. But that difference, that was a major fault line. Why change what was working, right?
Yeah.
That was probably Gotti's view.
And their personal styles couldn't have been more different.
Oh, totally. Gotti, he cultivated that tough guy image, always ready for a fight, very much played the part.
And then Castellano.
Castellano was, well, different. Tall guy, described as almost gentlemanly. He kind of saw himself as a businessman, a CEO type.
Even though he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, metaphorically speaking, or order others to.
Right. Violence was still absolutely on the table if he thought it was necessary. But
Yeah.
he wanted that image, that air of being above the street level stuff.
You see that in where they live too, right? That contrast.
Definitely. Gotti stayed in his neighborhood in Queens, middle class area,
Yeah.
very grounded.
While Castellano built that huge place on Staten Island.
The White House, they called it. Sprawling mansion. It was a statement, wasn't it? Showing his distance from the day-to-day grit.
Makes you wonder if that physical distance created like a real disconnect.
It very well might have. Stepping back from the streets can mean losing touch with the streets.
Now, besides the power struggles, his personal life got pretty dramatic too. And apparently, it even surprised the FBI. Let's talk about Gloria Elite.
Ah, Gloria. She was officially his maid, from Colombia. But it became much more than that.
Fair.
A serious one. Seems he developed pretty deep feelings for her. Not just a casual thing. It kind of shows a different side, maybe a more human side, needing that connection.
Even for the big boss.
Even for the big boss.
And this leads to something the FBI found out, kind of by accident, through that bug, right?
Yeah, the bug in his kitchen, which was a major coup for them, getting that in there past his security.
3 months they listened in. Must have been tense.
Extremely. They were digging for crime intel, obviously. But they picked up all this personal stuff, things they really didn't expect.
Like the trip to Florida, Tampa.
And it wasn't for mob business. He apparently went down there for penile implant surgery.
Wow. Okay. The head of the Gambino family getting that kind of procedure.
It definitely took law enforcement by surprise. He didn't exactly have a reputation as, a big ladies' man before that. So this was something else.
And the thinking was this was for Gloria.
That was the assumption, yeah. That he was doing this, going to these lengths for their relationship. It makes him seem, I don't know, more vulnerable somehow.
Less like the untouchable boss figure.
Exactly. A man in his later years focused on this very personal aspect of his life, maybe taking his eye off the ball business-wise.
And his wife, Nina. She eventually moved out.
She did, left the mansion. And for a little while there, Gloria must have felt like she'd, won, like she was the lady of the house.
A brief victory.
Very brief, because the timeline is just brutal. Her feeling triumphant, and then barely a year later.
He's dead. Outside Sparks Steakhouse. It's such a stark turnaround.
It really is.
Did Gotti know about all this? The affair, the surgery? Did he care?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Gotti never talked. Omerta. Even in prison. So we just don't know what he really thought about Castellano's personal life.
But you have to assume people noticed. It might have been seen as a weakness.
It's certainly possible. A boss perceived as distracted by personal matters. That could be seen as a liability or maybe just fuel for resentment already simmering.
There was that FBI agent, Joseph O'Brien, who had a nickname for Gloria.
Right, he called her the Yoko Ono of the mob.
That's quite the comparison. What was the idea behind that?
Well, the analogy is about an outsider, someone coming into the inner circle, becoming incredibly influential with the leader. And the others, the established group, see that influence as disruptive, maybe even damaging to the main enterprise. Infatuation leading to bad decisions, essentially.
It's fascinating how these real-life stories sometimes echo fiction. Someone pointed out similarities between Castellano and Michael Corleone from The Godfather.
Yeah, that comparison pops up. And there are some interesting parallels, for sure.
Like what? What were the main points?
Okay, so both were American-born guys who took over from Sicilian-born relatives. Both were acting bosses first. Both reached, arguably, the absolute peak of power in their worlds.
That's pretty striking already.
It keeps going. Both had diabetes. Both became separated from their wives. Both made serious attempts to, quote-unquote, legitimize the family business, move away from the street stuff.
Towards white-collar crime or even actual legitimate businesses.
Exactly. Striving for that different kind of respect, maybe.
What else?
They both relied on ruthless underlings to handle the dirty work while they tried to maintain that cleaner image. Both had these highly respected old-school street bosses under them. Castellano had Neil Della Croce.
Okay.
Both were incredibly wealthy. Both seemed kind of aloof, Castellano in his mansion, Michael Corleone in his compound. Both wanted acceptance from the legitimate business world.
And neither had kids follow them into the life.
Right. Their direct descendants didn't join the family business. And maybe the biggest parallel, both fatally underestimated a rival from the streets.
Gotti, in Castellano's case.
Exactly. Who ultimately took them down.
But there were pushbacks on that comparison too, right? Reality is messy.
Oh, absolutely. People pointed out, the Mafia was already becoming more Americanized before Castellano, and having powerful lieutenants while the boss stays insulated, that's pretty standard for organized crime.
And the impact of laws like RICO.
Huge factor. RICO changed the game. It wasn't just about one boss dying, the whole structure was under attack legally.
Now, about Castellano's own reputation for violence, it's easy to think of Gotti as the brutal one, Castellano as the businessman. Is that accurate?
Not really, no. People who knew him said otherwise. A former Gambino capo was quoted saying Paul was deadly, and that people shook with Paul. He commanded fear.
So not just a boardroom boss.
Far from it. If you look at the charges he faced, especially around that car theft ring trial, there were numerous murder accusations. He might have wanted a more polished image, but he didn't get to the top or stay there by being soft.
There's that story about the New Year's Eve party, too.
Yeah.
Shows his temper.
The Charlie Boy incident. This young guy shows up, tries to greet other guests before paying respects to Castellano, who was in a serious chat.
Big mistake in Mafia
A
etiquette.
huge mistake. Boss comes first, always. Castellano apparently tore into him, really dressed him down publicly, left the guy shaken. Shows how seriously he took that stuff, the protocol, the respect, and how quick his anger could flare.
And despite the image of him being isolated in the White House, he had ways of keeping tabs on things, right? Especially financially.
Yeah, that idea of him being totally out of touch isn't quite right. He had this system apparently giving each capo a large sum, like $100,000, at a big, basically interest payments back to him.
So it kept money flowing up, but also kept him connected.
Exactly. It was a direct financial tie, but also a personal one, to all the key players in the family factions. He knew who was doing what, at least financially.
Then there was the whole operation with Roy DeMeo, the car theft ring. Castellano profited from that, didn't he? Even if DeMeo's crew was notoriously brutal.
Oh yeah, he definitely profited. And that highlights the contradiction, doesn't it? He supposedly disliked excessive violence. There's a story about him being disturbed by the murder of an informant's girlfriend.
Oh.
But he was fine profiting from DeMeo's crew, who were known for extreme brutality. And this is the same guy who allegedly ordered hits on his own son-in-law and one of his daughter's boyfriends for perceived disrespect.
So violence was okay when it served his purposes or enforced his rules.
Seems that way. Very personal, very ruthless application of power.
Someone even got whacked for making a joke about his nose, comparing him to Frank Perdue.
That's the story about Vito Borelli, yeah. Apparently, the joke about the resemblance and Castellano's prominent nose cost him his life. And yeah, he had that nickname Nazabeak, supposedly given by an associate. Little things that show maybe not everyone held him in awe.
Let's contrast that with Gotti again. Castellano seemed more private, but Gotti loved the spotlight, didn't he? Played up the celebrity gangster thing.
He absolutely did. Cultivated that image, the expensive suits, the swagger. Became a kind of folk hero to some.
How did law enforcement see that?
They saw right through it.
Yeah.
The FBI agent who led the team that finally convicted Gotti was very clear. This flashy image hid a stone-cold killer responsible for multiple murders, a truly ruthless boss. The public persona was just that, a persona.
Going back, how did Castellano even get the top job? Carlo Gambino picked him over Neil Della Croce, the underboss. That was unexpected, right?
It was a surprise to many. Della Croce seemed the logical heir, but several things played into it. Well, family ties. Castellano and Gambino were cousins, and Castellano was married to Gambino's sister-in-law. Nepotism definitely played a role.
Okay.
Also, Gambino reportedly saw Castellano as having a better handle on the future white-collar crime, infiltration of legitimate businesses.
And there's another factor. Something about heritage.
According to one former capo, yes. Castellano was Sicilian. Apparently, within the Gambino family, there was a strong preference, almost a tradition, for Sicilian leadership. Della Croce wasn't Sicilian, so that might have tipped the scales.
Interesting, deep-seated traditions playing out.
Always part of the mix in these families.
Let's talk about drugs. There was an official ban, right? Under Gambino and then Castellano.
Officially, yes. Zero tolerance. Dealing drugs was supposed to be punishable by death. That was the rule in the books.
But the reality.
The reality was flexible, especially for guys already established or well-connected. Carlo Gambino's own brother was involved in narcotics, apparently without consequence. It was massively hypocritical.
And Castellano himself.
Same hypocrisy. There's that famous anecdote. He'd publicly sneer at guys driving Mercedes, calling them junk business guys, meaning drug dealers. And then he happily accepted a Mercedes as a gift from a known major drug trafficker within the family. It's pretty blatant.
It's just incredible.
And here's an ironic twist. Gotti's crew was heavily involved in drugs, which Castellano hated. But Gotti taking power actually saved the life of another Gambino member. Castellano had reportedly ordered killed for drug dealing.
Wow. The unintended consequences.
Exactly.
So what finally lit the fuse? What made Gotti decide, okay, now's the time? It came down to tapes, didn't it?
It did. Surveillance tapes. The FBI had recordings of Angelo Ruggiero, who was very close to Gotti, talking openly about drug deals. Major violation of the supposed rules.
And Castellano found out.
He found out, and he demanded Ruggiero hand over the tapes. This was a direct order from the boss.
But Ruggiero refused.
He refused. He went to Della Croce, his protector, basically saying, you gotta help me here. Della Croce backed him up. This created a huge standoff. Castellano's authority was directly challenged.
But wasn't there a twist? Didn't Castellano already know what was on the tapes?
That's the fascinating part. Apparently, yes. He already had transcripts. So demanding the actual tapes wasn't really about finding out what Ruggiero said.
It was a loyalty test.
Seems very likely. A power play. He was testing Della Croce, seeing if Della Croce would back him, the boss, or his own guy, Ruggiero.
And Della Croce chose Ruggiero.
Which put Gotti and his faction in a very dangerous position. But it also gave Gotti an opening.
He could spin it as Castellano being unreasonable, maybe? Use it as an excuse.
Precisely. He could rally support from others who already had issues with Castellano, his perceived aloofness, the focus on white-collar crime, maybe the Gloria situation. The tapes became the perfect pretext.
Did Castellano ever actually order a hit on Gotti?
There's no concrete evidence he gave a direct order. But everyone knew Ruggiero was finished if Castellano stayed in power. And Gotti was tied to Ruggiero. The writing was on the wall. Ruggiero's death was almost certain, and Gotti could easily have been next.
So Gotti struck first.
He struck first, proactively.
What about Castellano's other potential allies? The Westies, the Cherry Hill Gambinos. Could they have helped him or retaliated?
He did have those connections. The Westies were an Irish-American gang known for being tough, used as muscle sometimes. But they were also seen as unreliable, lots of drug use, more focused on their own turf wars.
And the Cherry Hill Gambinos.
They were Sicilians involved in heroin trafficking. Definitely had the capability, maybe even connections to bring in shooters from Sicily if needed for revenge. But after Castellano was killed, nothing happened. They didn't retaliate.
Why not?
Hard to say for sure. Maybe their loyalty wasn't as strong as assumed. Maybe they saw the writing on the wall with Gotti taking over. Maybe their own business interests took priority. Bottom line, they stayed out of it.
And Frank DeSico. He was seen as loyal to Castellano, but he was in on the plot. What was his motivation?
It's complex. His father was close to Della Croce, so there was that loyalty angle. And DeSico himself had become close to Gotti while they were in prison together.
Personal ties matter.
Hugely. Plus, De Sico wasn't Sicilian. Under Castellano, especially with that potential Sicilian preference, maybe he felt his own ambitions were capped. Siding with Gotti offered a path upwards. He became Gotti's underboss, briefly.
Until the car bomb.
Until the car bomb, yes.
We talked about Castellano's isolation. Was he really just stuck in the mansion towards the end?
It became more pronounced after his indictment in '84. Before that, he was still somewhat visible, going to his social club, the Veterans and Friends.
But the indictment changed things.
Yeah, the massive media attention, the legal pressure, it seemed to push him into more isolation. A key moment was him not showing up for Neil Delacroce's wake of funeral just before his own death.
Why skip that? Della Croce was his underboss, a huge figure.
Fear of arrest, maybe paranoia about surveillance. Whatever the reason, it was seen as a massive sign of disrespect. It probably alienated a lot of Delacroce loyalists and solidified Gotti's support. It made Castellano look weak or scared or just completely out of touch.
And then came December 16th, 1985. Spark Steakhouse.
The final act. It was all set up. Thomas Bilotti, his driver and new underboss, drove him there for a supposed meeting.
But it was an ambush.
A carefully orchestrated ambush. A hit team was waiting right outside the restaurant, backup shooters nearby, and Gotti himself, with Sammy Gravano, was parked across the street watching it all go down.
Just like that, in front of everyone.
Right on the street. As Castellano and Bilotti got out of the car, the shooters just opened fire. Multiple hits. Both men down instantly.
Who pulled the trigger? Any specific names?
John Carnaglia, a Gotti loyalist, is often credited with delivering the fatal shots to Castellano, but it was a team effort. Very coordinated.
And Gotti watched.
Watched it happen. And then, reportedly, Gotti and Gravano drove slowly past the bodies afterwards. A final confirmation. A statement of power.
What happened right after? Burials? Succession?
Castellano was buried, but famously, the Archdiocese of New York refused him a Catholic funeral mass because of his life. That sent a message.
And Gotti.
Gotti moved fast. Within about 2 weeks, he'd consolidated power. He was the new boss of the Gambino family.
Was there any pushback from other families?
Oh, yeah. The Genovese family, in particular, was reportedly furious, killing a boss without the commission's approval. Major breach of protocol.
Did they do anything?
They tried. They planted that car bomb meant for Gotti, but it killed Frank De Sico instead. After that, things seemed to settle, or Gotti managed to smooth things over enough to hold on to power.
Until he was finally convicted.
Exactly. Convicted years later, largely on Sammy Gravano's testimony for orchestrating Castellano's murder, among other things. Got life in prison.
So, looking back at Paul Castellano, what's the final picture?
It's incredibly complex, isn't it? He's this figure who wanted legitimacy, wanted that businessman image, but ruled through fear and violence, contradictions in his personal life, his approach to the family business.
His ambition, his choices, ultimately led to that bloody end on a Manhattan street.
And shifted the landscape of organized crime in New York dramatically. Gotti's era was very different.
It really makes you think about power, doesn't it? How fragile it can be. How personal lives and leadership decisions intertwine.
Absolutely. How loyalty shifts, how times change, and how underestimating someone, especially someone on the streets you've distanced yourself from, can have fatal consequences. It's a story with lessons far beyond the Mafia, really. What are the blind spots for any powerful leader? That's something to chew on.